Okay, everyone. So I've been doing some top 10 lists the last week or so. I did some scary movies from last year. I did some all-time Disney movies on my Facebook account. I've done top 10 candies of all time along with sports movies. I just thought we'd have some fun, try to not make everything super political, as important as some things are to talk about. Everyone's kind of already talking about that. And so if you want to read something else, I'm going to just post things that are a little bit lighter. And so one of those things I've been trying to do is give kind of some fun top 10 lists of just different things I've enjoyed over the past, from childhood up to recently as an adult. So my favorite game of all time is The Legend of Zelda, the series, the canon of all the games of Zelda. And you have to be kind of older to kind of appreciate a lot of them, but with one of the best titles of the whole canon of 19 games to come out just a couple years ago, Breath of the Wild, there was obviously a ton of younger fans, millions and millions and millions. It's like the best-selling game like the last couple years other than Minecraft, I think. So I'm going to give you a quick rundown of my top 10 Legend of Zelda canon kind of games. There's 19, soon to be a 20th. And I'm not going to include the Game Boy games. I know that's kind of wrong for some people because there's some really good Game Boy games, but I never played them. I didn't play Game Boy growing up. So I wasn't a big, handheld person. I was the console guy. So I don't want to rank the games that I didn't really have any familiarity with. So again, this is going to be a little bit of a stranger list for those of you that are really into all those games and know all about them. But I'm not going to include the Game Boy games, the handheld games and stuff. So my top 10 list, I'm going to start off with a little bit of a controversial number 10, okay? I'm actually going to put 10th already as the hype surrounding Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, which could come out, next year. I would think the earliest, probably the holiday season of 2021. Xbox X, I think number 10 or whatever it is, Xbox, the new console, and PlayStation 5 are both coming out this holiday season, so I don't see them trying to compete probably with that, even though it's not necessarily competition, but it is a big sales kind of event for two different consoles at the same time for the Switch. And while Breath of the Wild can be played on a couple different formats, Switch is the primary format. So that being said, there's not a lot of reason to compete with that, so I can see it coming out in 2021. Maybe it's going to be in May again, like Breath of the Wild came out kind of not in that holiday season. So it could come out anytime in 2021, I think. But at the earliest, I really believe it'll be the holiday season because Breath of the Wild, the original, was announced in 2014. It didn't come out till 2017. So, they're not in any rush. They know that it's going to be great. Everyone thinks it's going to be awesome. It's going to be a little darker tone. It's going to be like Majora Mask. I think like right after Ocarina of Time. So it's going to be a little darker theme, darker tone, but I think it's going to be a lot of the same in the sense of environment, Hyrule, and just kind of all the characters that we kind of got to meet in Breath of the Wild. That's why it's called Breath of the Wild 2. So it's obviously more of a continuation than reaching back into the canon and kind of pulling out different characters, kind of like Ocarina of Time did, as good of a game that was. So number 10 is Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, just based on hype alone, okay? It's probably going to jump up, I'm sure, after it comes out. Number 9, I put kind of a lesser-known game. It's called Skyward Sword, and I think this one was so good because it brought the dungeons back, which, again, it's been hit or miss with dungeons, but they did a good job in this game with the dungeons coming back. However, I think the gameplay was limited. There wasn't kind of the world to explore like most games. And this one came out in 2011, and it was mainly on the Wii. And so it's a good game. It's definitely better than a number. But I think because of the limitation of the world kind of map and just there's some AI features in it that kind of made it less. It made it more step by step instead of kind of you exploring like most Zelda games are great and known for. So it's a little lower, but the dungeons were really good on that one. So Skyward Sword is number 9. This one is interesting, number 8, because there's just a lot of navigational kind of things about this game that were cool. It kind of goes back into a earlier part of the timeline of Legend of Zelda, that most the games kind of go further down the road. So it goes a little bit more into the kind of the earlier part of the canon. So this one's the Wind Waker. It was on GameCube in 2003. I thought the visuals were pretty good for the time. It had some really good combat in the game. I thought, honestly, the fight with Ganondorf was really good. And so Ganondorf is the actual evil guy. And I'm going to give, actually, toward the very end, kind of some thoughts about just the Zelda canon from a Christian perspective, actually, toward the end. But this game was good because it had the main evil character, Ganondorf. It had some good graphics for its time. It was GameCube. GameCube always has had some really good games with Mario, with Zelda, with those franchises are always pretty good. But it just kind of gives you, I think, a good kind of overlay of all the things that you like about the Legend of Zelda kind of canon. It's got good gameplay. It's got kind of exploratory world. It's got lots of options. The graphics for the most part are typically really good, and it's something that you can replay a lot. So I think this game was a little poo-pooed at the time. I remember not getting so super excited about when it came out way back in the day, but it's kind of gained on me and grown on me a little bit over time. So number 8 is the Wind Waker. Number 7 is controversial because I think a lot of people think it's one of the worst. In the major games that were released in the canon. It sold millions of copies at the time. I was only like 6 or 7 when it came out. It shows you how old Zelda is. I actually really liked the game. I think the concept of the game were creative and they were different from what the first original Legend of Zelda was. The first one released, not the first one in the timeline. It's actually much further down the timeline. But it's the second Zelda, Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, and this is on the regular Nintendo Entertainment System, NES, back in 1988. And again, most people did not like the above head kind of, you're kind of going around the map in this little character, and then you kind of run into this little square, and then you kind of zoom in to the action. I know that that's kind of like different from just, top to bottom, left to right, kind of gameplay screen to screen, but they were being creative, and I really liked the action of the game. I liked the characters in the game that you were fighting. I liked that it was a little bit more unique in that you were trying to go get the Triforce of Courage of the 3, piece of the Triforce and restore to wake Princess Zelda from her coma, essentially, her curse that she was put under. It was a neat game storyline wise, and I liked a lot of the ways that the magic, powered up, the hearts, the different pieces of weaponry that you had. It was a creative game, and it went outside the box a little bit from what it was known for from the first game. So while some people didn't like that, I actually liked that they changed it a little bit, and I played it just recently as I got the NES. That little miniature version you can buy now with like 50 games on it, and it's got Zelda 2 on it, and I still like it. It's a great game. So I put Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, number 7. That's from NES from 1988. Whoa, a long time ago, ancient. Number 6 is one of the darker movies in the Zelda canon. It's called Twilight Princess, and you could play this on GameCube in 2006. It was also for the Wii when the Wii started getting big, and it's a little bit more of a unique storyline. It doesn't have as much of the heavy Ganon play. It's really more about this kind of evil princess called the Twilight Princess that casts a spell on Link, and it kind of is a side story a little bit in the Zelda canon. But again, when the timeline and storyline is so rich, you can make whole games about side stories in kind of ways. So it's got really good gameplay. I thought it was a little darker, a little grittier. The animation was unique. The characters looked a little different, almost a little bit more kind of Japanimation, kind of anime kind of style, a little bit less. Of the characters were like kind of cubed, and they were a little bit more kind of straight-lined characters and a little bit more narrow. So they looked almost like more like comic book characters. So it was kind of a cool kind of difference. A little darker, I think. Again, probably for a little bit more of an older teenager audience. But it was it's good to see the creativity and the change and the reaching back into the timeline and developing the story and the lore and the canon of Zelda a little bit more. Number 5 was one of the more well-known of all the games in the canon, and I didn't like it as much at the time. I started to like it more as I went along, and this one came out for the N64 back in 2000. You can also play it for the Wii, but it's Majora's Mask, and again, it was like the follow-up to Ocarina of Time, so it was coming off potentially one of the greatest games of all time at the time. And so it's like hard to follow that up. But when you really just appreciate the game for what it was, it's pretty good. But because it's more straightforward, it's kind of a linear storyline compared to Ocarina of Time. Again, it's different, and people don't like different things. But when you just start to learn to appreciate the thing for what it is, it's a pretty good game. And again, lots of different characters, lots of different pieces of the canon, the story that are in this story that weren't necessarily in some of the earlier games. You know, again, you get a lot more of the canon and the storyline in these Game Boy games and stuff. But Majora's Mask is pretty good. I thought it was really, really good, and I liked that it developed the canon. And it gave you some different villains in the game. So I really liked that. And again, if you kind of take it away from the Ocarina of Time and just allow the game to be by itself, I think you'll appreciate it more. Whereas when I was, you know, like every other kid comparing it to Ocarina of Time, it's kind of like, this is not as good. So that being said, I think as I got older, I appreciate it more. So number 5, Majora's Mask. Number 4 is on Super Nintendo, and it was really the first smash hit of the Zelda series on SNES, and really, I wouldn't say the only one, but it made the SNES kind of worthwhile to get beyond just, you know, some of the other games of Mario that were really big at the time, and some of the other fighting and sports games that came out. It gave me a reason to get the SNES. It's A Link to the Past, and this was back from 1992, and it's kind of like the more layered game that has lots of different narratives and storylines and things going on with it, just like the original Zelda did. There's more of a, what I would say is there's more of a very clear villain in Ganon, kind of demon spirit of Ganondorf that you're fighting, so you're kind of more used to that if you played the original Zelda. So again, it's a little bit more of a straightforward enemy. There's all that kind of layering of the game like you're used to, so you're used to kind of that. And it's also kind of been one that has gained a lot of credibility over time as one of the best of all time. Some people think it's the best of all time. Some people think A Link to the Past is the best Zelda game of all time, which that's just not true. It's a great game, but again, I think it's more of the top 5. But it's not the greatest of all time. I think maybe if it came out today, with the consoles that we have today, maybe, you know, but it was working with only a handful of games at the time, in 1992. So great game. Number 4, A Link to the Past. Number 3, this might get me in some trouble here, but I'm gonna put the original Legend of Zelda on the SN or the regular Nintendo system from 1987 as the third best of all time. And I love that game. It's just an incredible game. It is. And I went back a couple months ago and I played it again. I beat it in a day and a half. I mean, you know, I was like, how is this so hard when I was a kid? You know, it's like super easy to beat. But when you're a kid, it's like the greatest thing of all time. Just the adventure, just the different kind of zones, the 9 dungeons. You can go back and do it again as you're tested to make everything harder. You know, just the different ways that you can, again, go back and forth between time, between spaces with the whirlwind, all the different potions, all the different kind of, you know, zapping wands that you can use. There's just so many different tools to fight within the game, so many different kinds of enemies. You have to know specific dungeon maps. I mean, it's a fantastic game. It really put Nintendo, along with, of course, the original Mario Brothers, on the map, made it a staple for the rest of us, for generations. So it's an incredible game. I wouldn't say it's the best, because the others go so much further. But I can see why someone might say it is the best, because it is the original, and it's kind of the prototype for everything else. So I can get why someone would say it's the number 1 of all time, but it's, to me, the third best Zelda game of all time. So that's the original Zelda, 1987, on Nintendo. All right, number 2. I remember Christmas 1998. My parents bought this game for me. I opened it up, and I was just immediately hooked. I played the game, and this is before I became much of a serious Christian at all. I played it like straight for 4 weeks with my brother. We just played it and played it and played it and played it and played it. It is Ocarina of Time, 1998, from the Nintendo 64, N64 system. And this game was, to me at the time, and for a while, along with GoldenEye 007, maybe one of the greatest games of all time, in general, but just was a landmark game. It's later in the timeline of the Zelda canon, so it's not early. And it's more combining all the different storylines that are complex in the Zelda canon, in the Zelda storyline, in Ocarina of Time. That's why I think makes it one of the best games of all time. It's that it takes all the things of the narratives of the canon and it intertwines them together more. So you got the Seven Sages, you've got the three parts of the Triforce, you've got a young Link, you've got an old Link, you've got Zelda who helps with transporting him back and forth, you've got the original Ganondorf, so it's not the demon Ganon like in the original Zelda, but it's Ganondorf, the actual guy, right? And all of these characters come from the original enemy Demise, but Ganondorf is basically another reiteration of evil, and he keeps coming back and come back and come back, and we'll talk about that in a second. So that being said, I just think that second one is Ocarina of Time, and it's hard for me not to put it first. It just does such an incredible job of creating this very unique story within this massive canon. It intertwines all the stories that you've kind of understood, and it builds on them. It brings in lots of characters from all different facets of the timeline, and intertwines them without feeling too jumbled. And then you've got 200 different pieces of armor and food and trinkets that you can use, and you've just got all these different pieces that make it such an incredible game. Plus, you've got the world exploration kind of mode that really wasn't around as much at that time, okay? And now it's a staple for almost every big game, but at the time, it was really unique and original. And then, of course, Ganondorf is really, he's not the hardest enemy to beat in the game, but he's harder than most of the Ganons to beat. He's a challenging enemy. And just the levels, I mean, the water temple, oh my gosh, that level's hard. There's just some really hard dungeons in the game, which makes it a more challenging game to win. And I think when you look back some of the other games, they're a little too easy. They're a little too easy to beat. And so I think Ocarina of Time, again, for a kid, was a harder game to win, and it's just a challenging game. And the bow and arrow option, just all the different things you can unlock. It's just all the best Zelda stuff, plus all the intertwining of all the storylines, plus building on that stuff, plus the chronological stuff going back and forth. It's fascinatingly good. So number 2, barely not number 1. Of course, what is number 1? Obviously, it's the Breath of the Wild, 2017, Switch and for Wii, but it's known for the Switch. And basically about this game is the game play is out of this world. It's just out of this world. It feels a lot like Ocarina of Time in the sense that you have all these options to everything you want to do, but of course then now you have the Switch console instead of the N64 console, so it amplifies everything. Everything is better. Again, I think that the creatures that you have to build or that you have to beat, basically those mechanical beasts, right, that you have to beat and go in, those are so hard when they go to the next level, right? So even initially they're hard, but when you go to the next level, it's like, oh my gosh, this is so challenging. So they're hard to beat. So those are not really the dungeons per se, but you're supposed to basically go free and liberate them so that they can help you beat Ganon. And again, it's not Ganondorf, it's Ganon. It's kind of this demonic spirit or something like that of Ganondorf. And so your goal is to defeat him, to free Zelda once again in this kind of never-ending cycle, as you'll see here in a second when I talk about what's a Christian take on the Legend of Zelda canon. The gameplay is just out of this world. The storyline is incredible in that it really pulls in so much of everything in the canon into it, but it doesn't necessarily try to be some very strict time kind of piece. It includes everything, so it could be in a lot of different parts of it. Of course, as you get the expansion pack, it's incredible. It raises the difficulty level with the sword challenge, with the resurrection challenge that you have to do to kind of get leveled up even more. These last expansion pack challenges are awesome. They're just really, really great for the price. I think it was like $15 or $19, something like that. It's just really worth it if you really enjoy this game. And the game just has so much playability. You can just play it over and over and over again. You can start it again and you can enjoy it just as much. And the game is so fun to play when you have everything, because those Guardian Tower guys that you really just had no business fighting initially, you take out with 3 or 4 guardian arrows, later on in the game. So you feel like you've leveled up. So the game is incredible. The gameplay is incredible. The game replay is amazing. The expansion pack is awesome and worth it. It intertwines so much of the whole canon of the 19 games, but it doesn't feel like you've kind of just put a piece of a storyline in. It seems to kind of mesh with all of them. So those are my 10. I'll go through them again real fast. Number 10, the hype surrounding Breath of the Wild 2. Number 9, Skyward Sword from 2011. Number 8, The Wind Waker from 2003. Number 7, Zelda 2, A Link to the Past from 1988. Number 6, Twilight Princess from 2006. Number 5, Majora's Mask from 2000. A Link to the Past is number 4 in 1992 on the SNES. Number 3 is the original Legend of Zelda on NES, 1987. Number 2 is, of course, the Ocarina of Time, N64, 1998, Christmas 1998. And then Breath of the Wild in 2017 is the number 1 game of all time. So a couple quick snippets on just from a Christian perspective, this game. This is not to be super critical, okay? But this is just, I'm a Christian, and I want to give kind of some perspective on the game. Again, you just kind of need to be aware. Okay, so first, the game is very what we would call Eastern mysticism, okay? Just like Star Wars in some ways. It comes from an Eastern mystical tradition. Now, most people in the West are either one of 3 things most of the time. They're either agnostic, decidedly atheist, which is just a reaction to theism, or they're theistic, okay? Most people. I'm not saying every person. Clearly, there's lots of different, but the main traditions are agnostic, meaning there probably is a God. I don't know who he's not knowable. I don't know. Kind of a I don't want to be too mean about it, but kind of a lazy atheism in some ways. Number 2 is atheistic, which is more of a militant kind of anti-theism, most of the time decidedly against, atheism, anti. And then theism, and that doesn't mean just Christianity, it means Islam, Judaism, all sorts of different kind of singular gods, monotheism, basically, in a sense, that there's one singular power that controls and governs the world, okay? That could be deism, that could be, Islam, that could be Christianity, that could be all sorts of different cults of Christianity. They're not traditionally Christian, but are cults of it. But those are the majority of positions. In Eastern thinking, there's typically not one overarching God. In the sense, there's not kind of a theistic, one sovereign over everything. And you see this in the game that basically there's 3 kind of goddesses that create this triforce of power. And these 3 pieces of the triforce kind of put together, and they give you kind of this perfect balance, right? Lots of Christians like to use the word balance, and I would tell you that that's not really a Christian term. We don't believe in balance. We believe in the Trinity, okay? So this game kind of draws from Eastern mysticism and wants to kind of create the sense of harmony, okay? Balance. There's balance in the Force, like there is in Star Wars, right? Balance in the, the yin and the yang, okay? So the Triforce is 3 parts, okay? And those 3 parts, when they are broken apart, lead to disharmony in the world, right? If Ganondorf has the power Triforce piece and Link has the courage Triforce piece, right? There's going to be a problem. Someone's going to need to get the other pieces and put all 3 together, right? So typically what happens is Zelda will have one piece, Link will have another piece, and then Ganon will have another piece or something like that. That's, and then when one gets all 3, everything goes their way. Okay, so this is a teaching that comes essentially from Eastern mysticism, more specifically elements of Confucianism and Taoism, Taoism, that really teaches kind of a yin and a yang principle, okay, where everything comes from kind of 3, deified kind of beings, but not, we wouldn't say all-powerful, all-knowing, omnipotent God. So it's kind of I wouldn't say tritheism, but it's kind of a deistic polytheism of some sort, where there's multiple gods. And you see this in the game. There's just all sorts of different creatures that have all sorts of different powers and stuff like that. And the Bible does say that there are powers and principalities and angels and demons and things like that. So there are many powers in the world. The Bible is very clear about that. But the Bible is also very clear that there is one Almighty. And the Almighty God is the only one who has power in its ultimate sense. No one, not even Satan himself, has any real power apart from the power that the Almighty God gives to him. So, that's why Jesus says to Pontius Pilate that you have no power over me except for that which the Father has given you. So there's a real sense that in Christianity, There is one God who is Almighty God. He doesn't share power. There's not a lesser power being or anything like that. There's not three, kind of divine, goddesses that control this Triforce. And when the Triforce is broken, there's disharmony in the world. And when the Triforce is put back together, there's perfect harmony in the world. So that's kind of the first main issue. I would say that if I'm being critical, which I'm not trying to be too critical, I'm not saying don't play the game. Use your conscience, okay? But this game to me is super fun, but you just need to kind of know what they're trying to tell you, okay? So Triforce, three different pieces that create one superpower, kind of given by these three goddesses, and there's like these multiple, polytheistic kind of, pantheon of gods. Christianity doesn't believe in that. We do believe in multiple powers in the sense of that there are many kind of principalities and powers that God uses and wields, fights against. But there's only really one Almighty who has all ultimate power and is ultimately sovereign. That's what the word means, sovereign, to govern and to rule all things. So that's my first kind of general critique. The second one is this, and this one's a little bit more... this one's a little bit more insidious because you might not know, and you might start thinking that this is kind of what Christians think too. So this is a little bit more where you need to be discerning, is that the Legend of Zelda teaches what's called dualism. Dualism is this yin and yang principle, where there's an equal power with darkness and an equal power with light. There's an equal power with light and an equal power with darkness, to the sense of it's just who's going to win, okay? You could see it as a positive and a negative. You could see it as, invisible, visible, kind of the opposite, right? So plus, minus, you could see it kind of like that, yin and yang. The problem with this, okay, there's a lot of problems with this as a Christian. The problem with this is that, one, it's not necessarily moral or immoral. There's not necessarily a law per se that's being broken, okay? Because in Taoism, basically the positive and the negative are just, kind of perceptions of the one reality, but there's a dual perception, kind of two eyes. No, that's not what the Bible teaches, and that's not what we believe about God and about the law. There's one law, and it's an everlasting law, and there's no opposite law, and it's a moral law for moral agents who are human beings, okay? So we're to be governed by that law, okay? There's not just kind of a positive energy and a negative chi, okay? So dualism tends to be less moral, almost amoral in some ways, and gives you more of a positive, negative energy than necessarily a morality that's set and objective. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is it plays off the sense that there is some equal power to God, some equal power in a negative, evil way, as if somehow Satan has just as much power as God does, but just on the opposite God of God's goodness. This is wildly inaccurate. Okay, so if you have picked up by playing a few of these games, Ganon or Ganondorf or Demise, they keep coming back over and over and over and over again. You're like, why don't they kill this guy? Because they can't. It's an eternal principle. So good and evil are eternally interlocked in an everlasting struggle. No, the Bible does not teach that evil coexists with God. In the beginning, God was, and God said, let there be light, and all was good. It says in John 1, there is no darkness in him whatsoever, and the darkness has not overcome him. There is only light. It says in James 1:17, it says, there is no variation or shifting shadow. He is the perfect good God of lights. All good things come from him. He doesn't tempt us. There is no evil in him. So evil, as St. Augustine says, is the absence of good. Okay, there is no source of evil separate from God. It's the opposite of God in the sense of it's not imaging God. It doesn't imitate God. And therefore, it deviates from God. It rebels against God. So we're not dualistic. Okay, Christians are not dualistic. So religions that teach this tend to be Eastern religions, Zoroastrianism, Taoism, Confucianism, to some extent, a little bit of Buddhism, but Buddhism is very different actually. But more the Chinese religions, especially, and the Southeastern Asian religions, teach this kind of yin and yang principle, Taoism especially, Confucianism, things like that. So the problem with that is, again, very unbiblical. So just kind of be careful. Don't think that evil has some sort of equal pedestal with good in the world. Now, there is a lot of evil in it, but it doesn't come from God or derive from him, nor is there kind of a secondary origin that kind of runs parallel with good. So there is only God. This is his world. He is allowed by his divine wisdom and his divine decree for evil to be allowed to come into this world for the greater purpose of his redemption through it. God gives us triumph through tragedy that we brought into this world with our own free choice of rebellion and falling out of a relationship with God. So those are the two things I would say. Just kind of be aware of as you play The Legend of Zelda, is that we don't believe in a pantheon of gods, or polytheism of some sort, where multiple gods give you kind of different virtues to hold to, and if you hold to them all perfectly, you get your way, and if you don't, you don't get your way. And we don't believe in dualism. We believe that God is Almighty God. There is no other source of power apart from God himself. And evil is not a different origin. Evil is the absence of the good, as St. Augustine said. So it has no real origin except that it's a rebellion against what is good, who is God. All right. Happy playing, y'all.